Hey guys, this is currywurst speaking, and today we're going to do something very different. I'm going to explain to you why cycling is awesome in games and outside of games. And I shall do that from a perspective of a gamer who explains it to gamers. And also a little bit of a physicist that explains it to gamers. But anyway, so let's start out with the latter, the physics, right? The physics, because cycling is very mechanical in nature, and the speeds definitely require a little bit of physics to fully understand what is going on. First and foremost, friction and drag, super important. Everyone who has sat on a bike knows about that, but you might not be completely aware of the ratio between the importance of those two things. Mechanical friction is linear in nature. Linear means, for example, the number series 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, that's linear. So the faster you go, the more friction you have. If you go twice as fast, you have double the friction. Drag, on the other hand, is a bit of a special snowflake, because it wants to be quadratic in nature. And it goes like 1, 4, 9, 16 and 25 instead of the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So if you double your speed, you will have 4 times the drag. When you're sitting your fat ass on a bike and manage to get up to 30 kilometers an hour, that would be about 19 miles per hour, then that would mean that your friction versus drag is about 10% to 90%. 10% mechanical friction and 90% aerodynamic drag. The faster you go, the worse this ratio becomes. The drag becomes even more important, and if you're riding like 50, then basically the mechanical friction is negligible compared to that drag, unless you have massive amounts of tailwind. Fucking cheater. And that is exactly why hills and mountains are super important for bike races. If you are going up a mountain, then you need to invest energy into actually going up the mountain, and not only fighting air resistance and friction. So that will slow you down. And if you're slowing down, you have much less drag. So what do you need to optimally ride up a mountain? Do you need more power? Nah, not really. What is really important riding up a mountain is your power to weight ratio. While if you're riding on the flat and want to ride as fast as possible, it is mainly just about your pure maximum power number you can output. Enter the scene comes slipstream riding. If you're riding closely behind someone else, you are saving a massive amount of this drag force and just dump it in the nearest trash can, because you are nicely shielded back there. And the difference is massive, even if you are a complete nub and you manage to, or dare to, ride very closely behind, and we're talking centimeters, very closely behind someone else at speeds of like 30 to 35 kilometers an hour. You will know that it's super easy in the back to hang on, and as soon as you go to the front to pull yourself, it's torture. So, well, that is if you're not in shape, of course, and riding the Tour de France and all that kind of stuff. No, you're not. You're not, because you're a schlob watching YouTube videos and shit. So what happens with this slipstream if you're riding up a mountain together? Well, everyone is riding slower, right? That means you have less slipstream effect, which means that the one riding behind doesn't have as big an advantage as before when riding in the flat. To make things even more complicated, let's add wind to the mixture, and let's quickly talk about tailwind. Now, tailwind is great if you're riding in the wind at the front, because you will have less drag. But what about the poor souls riding behind you trying to leech off your rear wheel? Well, it doesn't look too good for them, because they are actually having to invest more energy than they would if there was no tailwind. If there is headwind, the situation is reversed, and the one in front curses you for leeching your back wheel, because up in front it's torture, while in the rear it's easy going as fuck, and the guys riding in the rear will probably wonder, why the hell is it going so slow? It's so, like, nothing happens. But yes, until they stick their nose into the wind and feel the full brunt force of the hurricane blowing against them. And then we have a very special case, that is crosswinds. crosswinds, you would think, like, if you're riding straight, Killrob, if you're riding straight, and then there's a perpendicular force on your cyclist, then that shouldn't matter, because that is perpendicular and doesn't affect your movement towards the front. And I say, fuck you, that's not correct, because you have forgotten one important aspect, which I derived and I have tested and all kinds of things. It's really interesting, actually. Not many people seem to know that. When you are riding in crosswinds, your effective wind vector length will be longer, and it will come from the side. This wind vector is now pointing towards the cyclist from the side, where he has a lot more area which can be attacked. And thus, even in crosswinds, moving forwards, even if they are perfectly perpendicular, you will experience a lot more drag than riding in no wind whatsoever. So much about physics, so if you're not sleeping already, let's talk about what makes cycling a perfect topic for a computer game. As tactics strategy game even, and that will be resource management. These races they are riding are around 5 to 7 hours long, depending on what kind of race it is, what stage it is, and so on. But you probably know from your own experience that if you go for a too long amount of time and invest a lot of power, at some point you just get a black hole in your stomach that would eat a cow if it could. And that usually happens at about the 2-hour mark. And that is because your liver is your main storage of energy in your body. And that storage of energy has energy stored for a medium power usage for about 2 hours of time. So what do you do on a 5 to 7 hour long stage? Well, the answer is you eat. You eat a lot. But of course, you can't always go at just medium power, and sometimes require just full-out bonkers mode. And that is what the Cycling Manager series refers to as resistance. And that is basically lasting, if you've run and done some like 3-kilometer races, I think it's most apparent there, maybe 3 to 5 kilometer races, that after 10 minutes or so, if you have gone too hard, you hit a wall. And then of course you have the Usain Bolt mode, which is just go at your maximum muscle strength limit, and that can only really be sustained for about 10 seconds. So just out of curiosity, you will probably want to know what kind of power numbers we are talking about here. For your resource management, well, during normal powered riding, you could say around-ish, very round-ish, 250 to 350 watts for most professional riders. I could be a little bit off there, it depends on the races and so on, but that is ballpark figure. Then if you are in the resistance region of power outputs, you can easily double that. It's between 500 and 700 watts of power they're putting down there. And then the all-out sprinting is completely crazy, and some of the best sprinters in the world have a power output of around 2 horsepower. That would be around 1,500 watts of power output. And here I want to address the obvious elephant in the room question, which always comes up when talking about cycling. It is annoying as fuck, by the way. Doping. Yes, everyone riding the Tour de France is probably doped, within the limits of what is detectable by the very strict controls. And that means about-ish a benefit of 10%, which is massive if you are at the top level. But if we are comparing it to the plebs, us, if you were getting doped just like that, your power and output and stamina would increase by 10%, you are still a fucking slob. So it doesn't really matter. No, but the main effect of doping in cycling is that you can train harder for longer. So now we take all our within the non-detectable limits doped riders and take them to the races and tours where they are going to compete. Races are single stages which are raced on a single day, where the first who crosses the line wins. Very simple, very straightforward, very long days, usually around 200 to 220 kilometers in length for the big races, and slightly shorter if they are more strenuous, more mountains, more hills and so on. Tours consist of various stages which are coming day after day, and if a tour is longer than 7 days, then usually you will have one rest day per about 6 days of racing. There can be completely different types of races and tour stages in tours and races, and that ranges from flat terrain to cobblestones to hills and mountains, and you can have individual time trials and team time trials, and it's usually a nicely mixed bunch, especially in tours. Now we just need those riders put into teams to actually race those races and tours. Teams are usually built around a few specialist riders. There could be sprinter teams, general classification teams, or teams that are just out after single stage wins or opportune chances to get a stage win, or just be seen in escape groups formed earlier on in a stage. What is less apparent to the average viewer is that cyclist teams are a lot larger than the teams you actually see riding at the day of the race. Usually a team is limited to 6 to 8 riders, while the team size as a whole is more around like 25 riders. But Kira, why are there teams? Well, teams are, like I said, built around these specialist riders, and these specialists are specialists because they are really fucking good at what they are doing. And that naturally means, if you remember the lessons from physics and resource management, that their resources are the most valuable and need to be protected at all costs. And they need to be spent at the most opportune moment and the most carefully chosen moment. The overall goal of teams is basically to be as visible as possible in a positive light to make the sponsors happy. That's quite obvious, I would think, but yeah, just thought I mentioned it. And then of course you have some jargon or terminology in cycling, which is not always the most intuitive. There's some weird words thrown in there, like peloton, which means the main bunch. And then we have escape groups, which are small groups forming at the start of a race usually, that escape from the main bunch and form a little group that tries to get to the finish line before the big peloton, the main bunch, can chase them down. If the riders are riding really hard at the front of the peloton, then you will probably see some gruppettos forming, which are minor groups of riders that have been splintered off the back of the peloton, and they are forming little groups which are trying their best to keep up or not drop out of the maximum time for that day of racing. The most practical form of gruppetto forming is the autobus or coach at the end of all the gruppettos. Basically the group where all the sprinters go when there is a mountain stage and they really don't have anything to win on that stage. That group is known for just keeping within the time limit. They are very good at gauging what speed they need to go up this horrible mountain in order to reach within the time limit, because they don't have any aspirations to win the overall standings anyway, which would be counted by how much time you have clocked in total on the tour. Another weird term that comes to mind is puncher, which basically refers to a rider that is very strong for a short period of time up the hills. So basically a sprinter for hills. Very important to understand are category climbs. Category climbs come in different numerical values, 4, 3, 2, 1 and out of category HC. And they are a little bit counterintuitive. You would think that a 4th category climb is much worse than a 1st category climb. But no, that is not the case, because this terminology comes from back in the day when cars were weak and old and scrappy, and the roads they were riding up were gravel roads. It refers to the gear a car had to use going up that climb. Or at least that is what people are saying that means. So if you had to go up in first gear, then obviously it was really steep, and if that is an average that you have to go up on the mountain in first gear, then yeah, that is a really harsh climb. Usually you could say that about category 4 and 3 climbs are more like hills, and category 2, 1 and out of category HC climbs are mountains. For sprints there is not quite the same thing, but during a stage in a tour, you will usually have intermediate sprint ratings, where you can gain a few seconds of time or some points towards the overall sprint jersey. And now let's talk about these jerseys, because they are numerous. The most well known, of course, is the yellow jersey, but that is unique to the Tour de France. Many other tours, of course, also have a yellow jersey, but I don't think they are necessarily allowed to call it the yellow jersey. I guess they have patented it or something. No, trademarked it. But anyway, so the yellow jersey is the overall leader's jersey. Whoever has used the least amount of seconds to get to the place they are at the start of the day wears the leader's jersey. Whoever has collected the most points in sprints and intermediate sprints wears the green jersey, the sprinter jersey. Whoever has collected the most points from category climbs wears the mountain jersey. And whoever is clocking in at the best time among the young riders will wear the white jersey, the young riders jersey. So now if we put all that together, the physics, the resource management, the structure of races and tours, the teams, and the terminology you don't really have to put together, but that all combined leads to the tactics of it all, and that is where it really becomes fascinating. So let's talk about a normal race. Usually you could say it is split up into different phases. In the early phase, which usually is very chaotic, escape groups try to form and try to escape from the main bunch, and the main bunch will listen to the radio and hear who's in there, and then they will make a decision of if they want to let them ride or not. If they decide not, then they will try to chase after them, capture them, and then slow down, well, because the chasing is usually really harsh, until another escape group forms as they slow down, and then this game continues on and on and on until an escape group is out there, which the peloton agrees to have out there. At some point, of course, the peloton will just say like, fuck it, now let's just let them ride. And the larger the group that goes away from the bunch, the more resources are collected in that group up front, which means that they will be a lot harder to chase down. So the larger the group of escapees, the more of a threat it will be for the overall stage win to the peloton. And of course they won't let any kind of favorite ride up front. He would be caught instantly. So then we move into the next phase of the race, which usually is the control phase. In that phase, the escape group will be fighting for the intermediate points to grab along the way, which usually are the mountain points and the intermediate sprint points, while the peloton will be trying to control the speed such that the advantage of the escape group doesn't become too large. And usually on a, say, 170 kilometer stage, which would be like average stage length you can expect, that would be around 5 to 6 minutes, would be a comfortable time. Sometimes they can blow out to like 10 to 12 minutes though, and then usually that ends up with some surprises, because maybe the escape group was a little bit better organized and pulling all at the same string than the peloton expected. And maybe there was a much stronger rider in there, which they didn't expect. That they of course know who's in there, but maybe that rider had a race day condition which was +5. Well, that's a reference to Pro Cycling Manager, of course. But you get the gist of it. So after this control phase, when moving towards the final 50-60 kilometers of the race, usually the chase phase begins, where the peloton then chases down the escapees, or at least tries to. On a flat stage, that is pretty much straightforward. The escapees are staying together and hopefully working together as best as they can and really putting the foot down. There is no holds barred. It's just like go full bonkers as long as you can, and that's the only way you will stand a chance to keep the peloton away. You could say as a rule of thumb that per 10 kilometers the peloton will make up about 1 minute of time onto the escapees. That changes a little in tailwind and changes a little in headwind. In headwind, the escapees are basically doomed from the start because it uses a lot more energy to ride in headwind, and they have less heads in that group up front. On mountain stages, usually the escapees will split up, and just at the end 1 or 2 may still be together or something, and they will split up over the whole range, and then the peloton will chase them down one by one basically, and at the same time the peloton will explode off the rear. So the riding will be so hard that riders just can't follow or don't want to follow because they want to save their resources for another day. On a flat stage, it all ends in a sprint, either by the escape group or by the peloton itself. In the final kilometers leading up to that sprint, something very interesting happens. About 10 kilometers before the finish line, so-called sprint trains form, which are set up such that you have the worst sprinter up in front, who is still an amazing sprinter and very hard rider. He rides first, then the next best one, then the next best one, the next best one, the next best one, and then the captain of the team, who's the main sprinter, if you have a sprint team. And in these 10 kilometers, usually the peloton makes up about 2 minutes on any escape group, because it's going so damn fast. They will be riding around 60 kilometers an hour. So this so-called sprint train is then working such that the first guy does the first 3 kilometers, just full out, just goes full out. And why are they riding full out, you ask? Well, first of all, no one is supposed to escape from the peloton there, because whoever does that is still pretty fresh from the day, because he has been in the peloton all day. But also it is a game between the best sprinting teams to form the best sprint train, and get their man into the perfect position to launch the final sprint. And the final man is usually just doing the final 400 meters or so, where they get out of the wind, or even less, 200 meters, where they get out of the wind, and they are the only guy that can add another 1 or 2 kilometers an hour to that speed they already have, which usually ends up in 65 to 70 kilometers an hour. But as you know, drag is quadratic, so those 2 kilometers an hour extra actually make a massive difference in power needed to achieve those speeds. So that was a kind of overview of a normal race day. There are infinite variants of what can happen and shit that goes down, which makes the sport so fascinating. But let's spin through another few scenarios so that you just get a feel for it, what the thinking there is. So if you say there are 3 sprint teams, and you as a sprint team have managed to get 1 or 2 riders into the escape group, that means your team will have less manpower to work for you, to get water bottles and to get food for the team. You want to save the resources of your captain as much as possible, after all. You want to shadow your team captain so that you will always want to provide extra slipstream for him. You will always want to have him at your rear wheel because he knows how you ride and what kind of mannerisms you have and so on. Right? It's very important to have a strong team with you. So let's say one of the 3 sprint teams gets 1 or 2 persons into the escape group. Do you think they will have to work in order to chase down the escape group? Well, of course not. They can say, look, our guy is in front, he has a decent chance of winning today's stage. Why should we do the work and chase them down? That's ridiculous. And they would be completely right. That is ridiculous. So what happens is that the other two sprint teams have to do all the chasing job and waste their team's energy. Let's spin another story here with an example of a strong general classification team which aims to win a tour. Usually strong mountain riders and good at time trial. So let's say there's a mountaintop finish on that day. And one tactic you will see, which is quite brilliant, is that you plan it such that you send one guy into an escape group who is really quite decent at riding mountains, but he is so far down the general classification that he is not seen as any kind of threat by the peloton, so he's allowed to escape at the start. Then as the day progresses, you as the potential leaders should do all the work, but then you have a guy in front, right? So you don't really have to. So the group continues on, and in the final climb, the group splinters, the front group splinters, and your man up front is doing pretty well. But of course he wouldn't be able to win because the favorites, the proper climbers and tour riders, they would be like gaining 6-7 minutes in the final climb on the poor outpowered escapees. But you told the guy up in front that he should save his energy. So what happens is your GC contender, the general classification contender, launches an attack, and no one can really follow him because he's one of the strongest riders after all, and the other teams are trying to chase him down. But then there's this rider up in front who has taken it really slow for the last couple of minutes and has a little bit of fresh legs. And suddenly your main favorite, who was well protected over all of the day, joins up with the rider who was in front all day and now a little bit saved up energy again. And he can pace his team captain up the mountain for a short amount of time and just give him another speed boost. Like all kinds of things like this, minor tactics which really make a difference at the end of the day. Like all sum up, it's brilliant. This sport is just full of tactical genius and failure, which is amazing to see. So I think this should be enough for now, and I hope it gives you a nice little shallow overview of what cycling is about in games and outside of games, and why it is an amazing topic for any kind of computer game. And at some point I think I'll be making my own cycling game actually, because it's just so damn good a concept. Alright guys, hope you enjoyed, and see you guys next time.